Good morning. Welcome to the Point. After a big election cycle, a contentious lame duck session of the legislature, the swearing in of new governor, lawmakers have finally returned to Lansing. Before they did, we went to talk to the new Senate Majority Leader at his factory in Jackson, Michigan. Here's our conversation and perhaps your introduction to the new SML, Senator Mike Shirkey. Senator, first of all, congratulations on your new position, Senate Majority Leader. I was thinking about the people that I have known as Senate Majority Leader over the years. Some of them have come from a manufacturing background, but few have invited us onto the floor of their business for our interview. So thanks for that. Tell me a little bit about your business background, because there are some folks that will be watching that haven't met you.
I'd be delighted to, Rick. Thanks for asking. So Orbit Form, we started Orbit Form in 1987, so this is our 32nd year. And we started in a little factory, a little shop, a little warehouse actually, about 1,500 square feet in 1987, building forming, fastening, and riveting machines. So we are a very niche company. We're an engineering company. We've got about almost 50% of our workforce is engineering or very technical oriented. In fact, I maintain that everybody here is skilled except me. So, and that's the truth to that, because there's a lot of these jobs I could never do. But we take people's problems in terms of how to manufacture something, and our tagline is solutions delivered. And so that's what we do. They bring their product in, oftentimes product engineers, and then they ask us to help them design a manufacturing process to build that, and then if we're successful, we get a chance to build that for them, and then they take it to their factories and build their products.
For a guy who started out automotive industry,
right,
creating his own engineering company, to being Senate Majority Leader, how do you make that transition from being a manufacturer, a business owner, and getting into politics?
Well, I mentioned a moment ago our tagline, solutions delivered. And I think some of the things that I've learned, I can't help myself. I think like and act like and process things like an engineer. And so that to me is a pretty appropriate way to approach things, problems, opportunities in the government. And so I've been for 25 years toying with the idea of running for office, and for 24 of those 25 years my wife said no. And in 2009 I said, I'm thinking about running for office again, and she goes, maybe. So that was the beginning of it.
So tell me about your political experience and what you think you've learned about that process. Obviously understanding about manufacturing and one process after another process, kind of an orderly kind of way to do things. Lansing doesn't always work that way.
Sure. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to be able to slightly move the needle on the culture in serving these 4 years as Senate Majority Leader, and that is how we approach problems or opportunities. I maintain that virtually every statute that's being contemplated is either a solution to a problem or to exploit an opportunity, and exploit in the proper sense, not the negative sense. And I think what I've observed is far too many times we start with the solutions and don't spend near enough time defining the problem. And the more time, it's commensurate, it correlates perfectly. The more time we spend defining problems, the more easy and the more elegant the solutions are. And so I'm hoping that we can, like I said, move the needle a little bit on that.
Well, to that point, the first thing you said to me this morning when you came in, when we were just trying to decide where we were going to do this program, you said, what are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
So when I look at you as a Senate Majority Leader, I'm going to turn that question back to you. What are you trying to accomplish? Obviously, you'd like to bring order, but there obviously are other things that you would like to see done. And as you've been observing these past years, participating as well, but as you look forward to these 4 years, what do you want to accomplish?
I hope we can accomplish a few things that are specific to policies. One is I hope we can find more classroom time for teachers. I've not heard anybody talk about that in the last 8 years, I've been serving now for 8 years, total of 8 years. I've never heard anybody talk about that. And what we've done over the last 8 years in my short tenure is layer on more and more regulations, more and more reporting requirements, more and more stuff onto administrators and teachers. Often, almost always with the right intention, but what it has resulted in my opinion, and it's a strong opinion, is that we've started to deteriorate and reduce the amount of time teachers can actually spend with students in the classroom. And that falls under hopefully my strategy of spending far more time legislatively in the oversight area. And when I talk about oversight, I'm saying let's take a look at some of the laws we've passed and some of the spending we've approved to see if it's actually performing as intended. It's also a freedom issue for me, Rick, because the more bills we pass, the more laws we get signed, that to me, every one of those is a chink in the armor of freedom of people. And so I think we have a responsibility to be very careful about that.
When you talk about oversight, there has been the question that I've been asking a number of times, why don't bills, all bills for the most part, particularly those with an appropriation, why don't they all come with a sunset or a review? Because many times those things get passed and they just become law and they just stay there on and on. So is that part of what
That's exactly what I'm talking about. But I don't know that we have to necessarily put it into the bills. It should be part of our culture. And committee chairs shouldn't need a new bill to have a reason to have a committee hearing. Let's pick out some of the old bills, some of the old spending priorities that we've established, and see if they're performing as we expected. Maybe they need to be amended. Maybe they need to be repealed. Maybe we need to discontinue them. But right now, as you know, you've observed this long enough, we spend very little time retrospectively reviewing our work, and it's mostly prospective.
One of the questions that has come up over the past several years when it comes to road funding is PA 51, which is the formula for spending that money that gets put into the Department of Transportation. Is that the kind of thing that you would look at? Are those some of the kind of older legislation pieces you might want to look at?
Absolutely. PA 51 is a perfect example, though, of some of the downsides of term limits. And I'm not using it as an excuse, but the reality is real, and that is that term limits cause us to have trouble actually doing tough stuff. And PA 51 is a perfect example. There's a lot of folks across the state, a lot of counties, a lot of jurisdictions who have established their own protocols, their own processes, their own way they do things based on PA 51, and they're well entrenched. And for somebody to come in and challenge some of the assumptions that were made back in 1951, when that law was put in place, it creates a little bit of a discomfort. And I think it's time for us to challenge that a little bit. I don't have any silver bullet solutions to that. All I can say is, based on what we all know, we need to invest in our infrastructure and roads. We got to make sure that as much as possible that goes into PA 51 is spent to that end.
Let's talk a little bit about the job that you are now undertaking, and as you and I talk, the legislature is ready to reconvene. By the time this airs, they will have had a couple of days and things will just be getting started.
Right.
It's a new administration across the board, all of the constitutional offices, new leaders in the House and Senate, with the exception of Senator Ananick, who comes back as the Democratic leader. So it's a whole new group of characters for the most part,
including me,
that are all going to get together. So what is your expectation about the way that the quadrant might function together with the input from the governor? Because everybody has experience, but everybody's new in this particular position.
Mm-hmm. So I've lived by, and have for my whole life, lived by the saying, first seek to understand before endeavoring to be understood. And I think if we all practice that, whether you bring up something new, or my governor brings up something new, or my Secretary of State brings up something new, I think my obligation is to first seek to understand what it exactly is they're trying to accomplish before me trying to be understood about my opinion on it. And I think that's a very healthy way to approach just about everything.
When you consider what is ahead for the state versus what we've seen in the past 8 years, the past 8 years saw us coming out of one of the greatest economically troubled times that any of us have lived through. The previous 8 years were very difficult for divided government, largely because of the great shortfalls that came into the state treasury and differences about spending priorities and where money could come from. This past Governor Rick Snyder, had an advantage of having a resurging economy and manufacturing and unemployment numbers like we have never seen, or at least haven't seen for a very, very long time. So now you have, again, divided government. For the first time in 16 years, you have a governor who has legislative experience, but she also has a Republican Senate and a Republican House. So what does that tell us about what's going to happen going forward? Again, considering that the economy right now is pretty good. Are you guys going to be able to get together on budgeting and do the kind of early budgeting that we've seen? Or are we going to go back to the old days where they got done late September and sometimes early October?
It'd be a shame if we lost that discipline. We spent now 8 years getting that discipline in place. I think my friends across the aisle all acknowledge that it's been helpful across the board. So it'd be a shame if we didn't continue that as part of our objective, is to get budgets done earlier than usual, and not leave them hanging. So I'm looking forward to it. I think my Governor Whitmer, I think with her legislative experience, I think she understands that it was going to be a partnership, and that we can get a lot of things done if we just listen to each other first, try to understand what we're trying to accomplish. We'll have plenty of opportunities to disagree, but we can do it in a way in which I can seek her objectives and her goals, she can seek ours, and find a way to meld them together. We're playing a game. It's called Do Our Best to Make Michigan Great. Okay? We're not enemies. We're opponents on the same game. We may have different paths, but we're trying to accomplish the same thing. And so let's kind of approach it that way and see where it takes us.
I want to ask you a question that I asked of the governor when we sat down to talk. And it's speculative, I know, but I wonder, as somebody who serves as a term-limited legislator and somebody who understands term limits as they are, does divided government give you more opportunity to come up with a compromise? And by that, here's what I mean. If I'm a governor with a Republican, Democratic governor with a Republican legislature, I might be able to say to my constituency, well, look, I got this much, but I had to give in this much because of the political reality of it. And could the same be true for legislators who might otherwise be reticent to go along with some of that compromise, but now they have the real ability to say, this is the only way we were going to get this done?
So I'm going to be particularly on the lookout for things that are going to cause us to go backwards in where we've come from the last 8 years. Increasing amounts of opportunity, economic freedom, job openings that none of us would probably have dreamed of 8 years ago. Tax structure that is more competitive than has been in a long time. All those kinds of things, I think, wouldn't necessarily be causation for our success, but they absolutely contribute to our success. And we are going to be on a particular lookout for making sure that those things are maintained and not mitigated or degraded.
Let's talk a little bit about the Senate and the makeup of that Senate. You have fewer Republican members than you have had over the past few years, still have the majority. How would you describe your caucus as they go in? Because we got a whole lot of freshman members in there.
Well, we have 16 returning members, 6 returning members and 16 new members, most of which, all but one I think, came from some House experience. And so I remember when on my time in the House, there was a bit of a adversarial relationship between the House and the Senate. Most of the times it was healthy, but oftentimes it wasn't. And I was handicapped coming into the Senate with thinking, boy, those guys in the Senate, the guys and gals in the Senate, they're just a bunch of goofballs, you know. So I think we have to overcome that first. And I've been working real hard with Speaker Chatfield. Actually, Lee and I have been working for 2 years to establish I think, a very close relationship, a communication and personal relationship. And he and I see the world very similarly. And so I think that if we can continue that trend, bringing the new senators into the Senate and explaining that this is not about me, it's all about we. Particularly, as you mentioned, the fact that we have a little bit smaller margin in our majority, we have to emphasize that notion. It's all about we. There's no room for me's in that caucus room.
Well, you brought this up, but it's, as an observer, it's been pretty clear that maybe over the last couple of terms we've had friction between the Senate and the House at a time when Republicans controlled all the levers of government. So does this give you and the Speaker a chance to be more unified?
I think if we've both observed what you just referred to personally, and I think we have an obligation to do our best to not repeat that. There's plenty of reasons for why that frictional loss occurred between the Speaker and the former majority leaders, but we don't need to go back to that point. We just observe and say, well, there's some things here we don't want to repeat, and I think you're going to find a different working relationship going forward.
We obviously had the chance to have a wide-ranging discussion with the Senate Majority Leader, but when we come back, a surprising focus and a timeline on a very important issue. That's all next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This legislative session in Lansing will be an interesting one from a lot of different standpoints. A Republican Senate and House with a Democratic governor, the first time we've had divided government in 8 years. To see what they'll be able to do will be interesting, but on this next subject that the Senate Majority Leader brought up, it has been plaguing the legislature for decades. Could they really tackle auto no-fault insurance? So as you embark on this new session, you've already talked about some of the things that you want to do. You want to do oversight. You want to make sure that you have that good relationship that you were just talking about. Are there any really standout things? I mean, you're bringing up one that I thought was pretty interesting when you talk about education and having teachers spending more time being teachers. But are there any big priorities that you would like to get done in your next 4 years?
Well, the biggest one that we did a survey of all the incoming members in the Senate plus the returning members just before Christmas, and by far the number one goal, number one objective, number one concern is insurance reform, auto insurance reform. And I believe personally that we've got about 4 months, 4 or 5 months to get it done, because after that we get too close to the next election cycle and things change. So this is a very high priority for me, and I think it's an obligation for everybody who was reelected or everybody that was elected to spend time on this. My observations heretofore is that those who have advocated for reforms generally have favored one side of the equation or the other. Insurance kind of driven reform or provider kind of driven reform. And it's my intention to go right down the middle. And at the end of the day, have material, measurable reform, and everybody leave the table about equally dissatisfied.
So if everybody's a little unhappy, that may be the best solution.
That's the perfect spot. That's the sweet spot.
One of the questions I have about I have 1,000, but one of the questions that I've had, even about the Senate passed plan that came out a few years ago, which kind of took a pretty broad swipe at trying to get some controls in place. Even, let's say that you're successful. Let's say that you come up with a reform. Let's say that everybody leaves a little unhappy. Let's say that the governor is willing to go along with the plan as well. Sure. What can you do, or should you do, to get to the bottom line for most people? Most people, I'm guessing, aren't dissatisfied with the coverage they have. They're dissatisfied with the price they pay for the coverage. That's my assumption. Right. So how do you, as a legislator, particularly as a Republican legislator, make sure that those premiums go down without being in the business of telling businesses how they can operate? It's
a narrow pathway. But we've got to make sure that we're not starting with the notion that high cost of insurance is the root problem. That's a symptom of the problem. And all the other elements of our auto insurance laws are the roots of the problem. We'll take them on one at a time. We've got unlimited coverage, for instance. I don't know anybody who, give me 30 seconds and I can't get them to agree with me that the notion of unlimited coverage doesn't pass any logical test. It just simply doesn't. And so we have to attack that one first on and get people to agree. And then you were alluding to things like price controls and guarantees on premium reductions. Well, let's put those aside for a minute and let's get the insurance industry and the providers getting out of the mode of saying what they won't do and start talking about what they can do, and see if in that menu of things they can do will actually accomplish what we just talked about. And I think that's the right approach. We can do this, Rick. We can get this done.
Well, if you can do this, you would be the first group of legislators in decades to get it done. You talk about that narrow window of 4 months or so. So the next anticipated question is, can I expect to see hearings and or legislation and or something, or do you have to first bring all the parties together and discuss what might be acceptable before you can head down the legislative path?
C, all of the above. There's going to be bills introduced, there's going to be committee hearings, and we're going to be having rooms with all the special interest groups. But I will assert this to you, Rick. I think split government also provides the best opportunity for us to actually kill this demon and put it behind us.
That would be if possible, that would be a major accomplishment to look back on. So we got a couple of minutes left. What other type of things will you try to shepherd through in what, if you really, in that first 4 months, if you were able to accomplish insurance, auto no-fault insurance reform, you probably also build up quite a bit of political capital with people on both sides of the aisle, so even more might be possible. What would those things be?
So I've got some personal things, but we're only going to have our first caucus meeting this week to talk about caucus priorities. And one of the things I'm committed to doing is I'll advocate for my personal priorities, but we're going to be building a priority list for our caucus, and that's what I think my responsibility is to advocate for the caucus priorities. A couple of things on my list are, I think certificate of need is a thing of the past, and we need to challenge that. And I know that's going to make some of my friends, some of my very good friends in the provider world, a little bit nervous, but we can do it. We can find a pathway to do that. I think because of the shortage we have in skilled places, particularly and especially nursing, that I think we should open up the gates a little bit and allow certain community colleges to confer bachelor's degrees for nursing, because most of the raw material for bachelor degree nurses is going to come from associate degree nurses who are already working full-time, already moms and dads, already engaged in their communities. They haven't got time to travel to to a university and so forth. And the fact of the matter is, those last 2 years of a bachelor degree in nursing is mostly didactic. It's mostly classroom work anyway. So we can bring the professors more closer to home. So those are a couple of my personal priorities. Talk to me in about a week or two, and we'll talk about the caucus priorities.
I'll be happy to do that. And as we leave, give me your general sense of the state of Michigan. We know we just came through an election. We had a lot of conversations that are politically heated, but from a realistic perspective, from somebody who sees it from the inside out, what is the general health of the state?
All right, so I'm going to use a storyline here to answer that question. If somebody from outside Michigan were to have to watch the speeches of the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and new attorney general, and only had that perspective on Michigan, they would leave that thinking, wow, Michigan must be in deep poop. Well, that's not the case at all. But just like in a manufacturing environment, I don't care how good you are, there's always room for improvement. We're in pretty good state right now in Michigan, but there's lots of things where we can improve on, and we've already talked about a couple of them, one being our auto insurance. So I'm not afraid at all about this notion that we've got work to do. Oh boy, that will help, won't it?
That's what we get when we do these on a manufacturing floor.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us come in.
You're welcome, sir.
When we come back, a look ahead at what else the legislature may try to tackle this year, and a look forward to what we can expect out of Lansing overall. That's next. To the Point.